Hi, this is Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and you're listening to Job Search Radio. So, job hunting isn't just simply for younger workers. It's clearly something that is happening far more regularly for middle-aged and older workers than when I started recruiting what seems like 100 years ago or so. And the fact is, for middle-aged and older job hunters, people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, job search careers are more complicated than they were before. When I started in recruiting, you got a job, and at a certain point, you stayed in with organizations until retirement, and that has long since disappeared. So my guest is someone who also hosts a podcast, but his focus is on life in the Middle Ages and older. So I hope you enjoy this show. I hope you get something from it, whether you're an older worker looking for a new position or someone younger. There's something in there, I believe, for everyone. So let's join together and sing along.
Are you looking for a new job or interested in leveling up? Job Search Radio is your go-to resource for insider tips on job hunting and growing your career. Here's your host, Jeff Altman.
So my guest today is Roy Richards, who's the host of Middle Age Can Be Your Best Age on Web Talk Radio. He's a compatriot of mine on Web Talk Radio. Roy, welcome to Job Search Radio. Great to have you on board.
Well, thank you. I think you're performing a great service to have a program specifically on job search. I think that's a great need that so many people have.
Oh, for sure. I bet you say that to all the hosts that interview you.
No, I really
so,
mean
Roy,
I think it's a great program you have.
Thank you, Roy. So let's start giving folks some help. And one thing I know, well, I've observed, and let's see if it's consistent with you. A lot of people who hit middle start to hit personal and professional lethargy. And they kind of exist, but they're not really driving as hard as they did when they were younger. Is that what you see?
I see that a lot. People hit their plateau. Maybe it becomes clear they're not going to get any further promotions, or for whatever reason they're locked in a job that is not what they dreamed of when they were in their 20s and 30s, and they just sort of go with the flow and proceed toward retirement, which they really probably don't have that well defined, or maybe they just get real depressed because they think their best days are behind them, and they're just basically existing rather than really enjoying life. I see that way too much.
There was a movie many years ago with Jack Nicholson and Helen Hunt. And there was the title of the movie, and the line that Nicholson says is something along the lines of, is that all there is, or is this as good as it gets? And I think that a lot of people kind of get stuck in that.
Yeah,
is that what you keep saying?
Peggy Lee had a song or something, is that all there is?
Sing for us, Roy, sing.
No, that's not my talent. Although that was one of my passions, it's not one of my gifts.
It used to be one of mine, but listening to my wife and son, they disagree with me. So what can someone do to start getting going with, I'm going to call it waking up and getting back to living again?
Yeah, I would, there's obviously different things work for different people, but I've got a little exercise in my book that's called A Vacation to Define Your True Vocation. And this is not a formal vacation. It's a vacation in the mind, effectively, that it's not always easy, and you obviously can't do this at the stressful time of year, like if you're a tax accountant, you can't do it right before April 15th, but it's something where you tune out the stress, at least for a 30-day period, and say, it's not going to get me down. And then in your mind, you start really going on vacation to consider all the possibilities of where you would like your career to go from here forward, whether it be modifications to your present job or whether it be something totally different. But I think it's an effective exercise to get you away from merely existing and struggling to reach the same old the rut you're in.
And I agree with you, and I could also see how hard it can be for someone to do that. I'll use myself as an example. I'm a guy who works in a profession that is very demanding, and I add on top of that all the videos and podcasts I do, the writing that I do. Boy, taking a vacation from that to figure out next steps, I don't know how to do that.
I know it's not easy, but on the other hand, there's a story of an old dog here in Iowa that was laying on the porch, and he was laying on a nail, and he kept yelping, and the visitor asked the farmer why the dog didn't move, and he said, well, he's laying on this nail, but he's too lazy to get up and move, or doesn't have the initiative to move off the nail. And I think at some point in time, you really have to take that vacation in the mind if you're really stuck and you don't see any good pathway to something better. It's just something you just can't afford to keep doing for the rest of existence. I had a dream one time where I was had died, and I guess I'd gone to hell, because it certainly wasn't heaven, but there wasn't the devil running around with a pitchfork, and it wasn't hot or anything like that. I was just doing the same old that I'd been doing for the past few years before, and I thought, boy, if my present situation is my dream of hell, I better wake up and do something different.
You remind me of an old Woody Allen movie. I want to say it's Take the Money and Run, where he's in jail and he's in solitary, and he's been there for a long time, and now they open the door and he's going to see his first person since he's been in solitary confinement.
Oh, wow.
And it's a life insurance agent saying to him, well, let me start you off with some whole life, and let's move on to term after that.
Yeah,
my apologies to all the insurance agents who are listening.
I used to be, I was a wholesale insurance broker.
You know what I'm talking about.
I wasn't a life insurance salesman, though, so I didn't talk about that kind of thing.
Is there a way that you suggest people can take that kind of mental vacation?
That's not really an easy thing to do, but you've somehow got to. You've got to start from the premise that I'm not a captive of this job. You hopefully can do it without quitting your present job, because, as you know, as a job search expert, that's never a particularly good idea. If you give up an income, you don't have to. But if there's just some way, on weekends or whatever, that you don't have to do it 30 days straight, obviously, but you really need to divorce yourself from all the present stress and all the disappointments with your current position, everything's wrong with your position, and really start thinking about, if I could start over again, say if I won a $100 million lottery and could do whatever I wanted with the rest of my life, what would I be doing? And if I had a job where I was guaranteed not to fail, and I could make enough to fund our chosen lifestyle, what would I be doing? And you start with that, and then maybe you write an ideal position description, and then maybe you sit down and compare that position description with your current position description. And sometimes they're not all that different. It's just a few little or maybe some large changes that are needed, maybe a different employer but the same basic job, or maybe not even that much of a change. Maybe your boss doesn't know what your current stresses and complaints are with the job, and maybe it is possible to have something better right where you are. But I love where a prior guest you had on July 27th, a Reverend Dr. Brian Amons pointed out that you have an ideal of what you want to accomplish in life, and you keep trying to move the job that you're actually in closer and closer to that ideal. And I like that, either changing jobs or modifying your present job, where you have in mind a clear ultimate destination of what your passion says you're good at, and your gifts, talents say you're good at, and you just keep moving that job closer and closer. And if you have to stay in your present job to earn a living, you do that for a while, but you're trying to orient that job more and more toward the ideal. I like that concept as well.
And folks, I want to make sure that you hear one thing that Roy said clearly about that show, is that Reverend Dr. Ammons didn't say quit your job instantly.
No.
He said take the time to do the soul searching, the evaluation, to kind of figure it out. And then he used an analogy from the Bible about the tent makers, and that there were people who made tents. That's what they had to do until they could figure out what to do next.
Yes, I like that.
And he spoke in terms of being a tool maker, doing what's necessary while you figure out what that next step is in your life and in your career.
Yes, I wrote my 2 books while I was still an insurance broker, and I wrote them on nights and weekends because I had come to the conclusion that that's really what I wanted to do, but I still needed the income, at least for a period of time, so that that's kind of the concept.
Yes, it is. And folks, the show is called Finding a Purposeful Career by Finding the Intersection. So if you go back and listen to that show, you will find it is golden.
Yes, I love that intersection. If we could all find that in our lives, that intersection of the 3 circles, the gifts, the passion, and the world's needs, and you hit in on that intersection of those 3 circles, you've really got got someone that'll pay you to have a good time, as I like to put it.
Agreed. And folks, we'll be back with more from Roy in just a moment, but first my insider tip for this show. And this one is geared toward older workers, older than the middle-aged workers that Roy speaks to on his show. I received an email from someone today who he was closer to being a contemporary of mine. I'm in my mid-60s at this point. I think he's about my age as well. And he politely spoke about being over 60 and whether he should trim his resume to hide the dates that would indicate age in order to get more interviews. And I responded to him by saying, it's one thing to trim information that's from the antiquities. So, for example, in my case, if I wrote about things that I did in 1972, who cares? What would I have done that might vaguely be relevant in 1972 when I got out of college? Actually, I was out in 71. This is the year after college. What could I have done at that time that's relevant today that someone would hire me for? So I suggested this individual trim the extraneous work experience, not to hide the dates. As a matter of fact, I suggested summarizing the prior experience that was being trimmed in a single line. But to take out things that were less important. And then when we got to the question of when he received his degree, I pointed out to him, it's not like you'll be able to hide your age when you walk in the door. It's not as though suddenly you're going to look like you're 24 instead of perhaps 64, which is my age. So rather than waste your time by going on an interview where a bigot is going to say no to you, no reason to hide the date. If they're going to be bigoted, you don't have to pay for the trip to go there to experience the bigotry. Just let them see it up front, and if they're biased, so be it. You'll find an organization that isn't. So that's my tip for this show. Let's come back to Roy and pick up where we left off. So, Roy, we've been talking about this notion of taking the mental vacation.
Yeah.
And what sort of things might someone do on this mental vacation that's going to flush up some of these ideas?
Well, you start, like I say, you write a position description for your dream vocation. Now, of course, that's not always easy, the dream vocation, but there's all kinds of things you might do to define what that is, because a lot of people get off track and they've been doing something other than their dream for so long that that they forgot what they really most want to do. You know, how do I most like to spend my free time? What were my childhood dreams? Of all the individuals I know, who has the best career? What vocations do I most admire? And here's probably the best one. What do career opportunities to friends and loved ones, maybe a personal coach if you have one, what do they say I should pursue? And all these kind of questions. And then you hopefully write this ideal position description, and it's as specific as you can make it, you know, even who you'd report to and what your functions are and what the qualifications would be. And then you examine that and say, you know, based on my present qualifications, education, background, et cetera, would anyone consider me for this ideal position? And then if the answer is no, I mean, if I decide I'd love to be a physician and I'm 50 years old and don't have medical school, that probably isn't going to work. But then I look for, you know, alternative second choice vocations that would use a lot of the same skills and passions, but would be more realistic, like maybe starting getting into hospital administration if I had some background in that, or you know, with an MBA, or perhaps you know, opening a health food store. There's all kinds of possibilities there, but you know, basically you're trying to hone in on the ideal vocation that you want to shoot for, and then of course the next big issue is how do I quote buy time to do the transition? What's it going to cost? Does my family you know, you need to get them involved from the start, and are they willing to sacrifice along with me? Do they agree with this change in what I'm intending to do? And how long is it going to take, you know, all the issues that you have, so you can basically buy the time up front so that you're really doing the type of job search that you need to be doing, rather than just taking the next job because you have to. And this obviously even works if you're out of work, although obviously it's a lot more difficult in some ways because the financial pressures are greater. But on the other hand, that's your full-time job. So in that way, it's a lot easier. Your full-time job is marketing yourself to that next job.
There's a process I've facilitated for a number of years for people to help them kind of figure out what would be meaningful to them. And it's a little different than what Reverend Dr. Ammons explained, but it basically involves, you know, relaxing yourself to some soothing music, clearing your mind, and then there's a visualization that has someone kind of wandering through a familiar place to someplace completely unfamiliar, and then finding themselves in a place where they see themselves as being young. Could be like 10 years old. Yeah. And having a conversation with the 10-year-old who you ask, what could I do for you? Of course they say, you know, I want you to love me, of course. Oh, that's a given. But what could I do beyond that? And then they start talking about what has been missing for them in their lives that they always wanted to have. And then take them out of that visualization, have them jot it down, and then remove that, have them go back into the same sort of relaxed state, and imagine if the world was remedied and everyone could have that same wound healed later on, so that they'd have the chance to cure everyone who had that same issue. And then combining the two, you have a vision and an action to take to make it possible for that. And often people are able to start sorting through some of the things that will float their boat. And they can start translating that into work, relationships, and a whole host of other things.
Well, I like that idea. You know, anything, like you say, that relaxes the mind and gets you away from the day-to-day hassles that you have at work. And like I said, it's not always easy, and if you need the money, but, you know, it would be nice if if everyone that was in transition could find a no-brainer type job that was not stressful, but permitted you to really concentrate on what you really wanted to do with the rest of your life. But on the other hand, of course, you don't want to accept a job generally unless it's a win-win situation. You obviously don't want to accept something that you know you're not going to stick to very long. But
if you can avoid it, and sometimes people have to do it. Certainly, after the beginning of the Great Recession or the Great Depression Part 2, however you want to refer to it, people had to make compromises.
Yes.
And sometimes you make those compromises to ride out the hurricane to get to shore.
Yes, that's right.
So once someone has an idea of what they can do and what would get them out of their mental lethargy, what do you normally recommend someone do then?
Well, I recommend that you start visualizing yourself as an incumbent in the job and the specific. I don't know if you're going to identify some specific company you'd want to work for, or just, that's probably getting too specific because you don't want to set yourself up, obviously, for a big disappointment. But you really start visualizing yourself as an incumbent, and you become as knowledgeable as you possibly can of the industry or the type of function that you see yourself as performing. And then eventually and you're the expert on networking and, searching for the actual making the connections. But once that connection is made, you really feel like you're an incumbent and you have something to add, and you know what the potential employers really need from the type of position you're looking for, and you really feel like an incumbent that has some ideas that could help solve whatever the issues are. And that's so vastly different from just looking in the internet for the latest job listings and responding to the listings on the internet. And
folks, let me make it easy for you. You never have to look at listings again. Most sites have agents that will deliver those listings to you. It makes it real easy. It gets delivered in your inbox. You do a quick scroll through, then let's get on to other things. Got it? So the things that people do to waste time and procrastinate from useful activity is extraordinary.
Yes.
And this sort of activity that you're recommending really is so important.
Yes, it's so important, and maybe somebody lost a job, the plant just closed, or the region office just closed, or maybe the company went out of business, takeover, or whatever, and most people panic and they immediately start running around looking for another job. But if they just took this 30 days off and said, this is obviously scary financially, but if you can somehow buy a month or 6 months or whatever time you think it's going to take to transition, and I mean by buying that you make these financial plans and sacrifices you must make up front, and then you really can engage yourself in this comprehensive vacation, as we call it. It's not a vacation. It's the true vocational search to hone in on just what you want to be doing with the rest of your life. Then you go from there, and then you transition right from having identified that position then into a full-fledged marketing campaign to get yourself sold and to the type of customer, which is the potential employer that you want to be employed by. And it can be a very positive and life-changing operation, and maybe you weren't all that satisfied with what you were doing before anyway, so it can be a real blessing in disguise.
I agree. Now, we've been talking about the professional side of this and escaping the lethargy that often exists in middle age. And by the way, folks, this notion of the lethargy isn't exclusive to, quote, middle age. I run into a lot of 20-somethings and a lot of 60-somethings who've got that same lethargy.
Yeah.
So what can someone do to get out of that lethargic life stage? And this goes beyond the job search questions that I've been asking so far. What sort of other steps can someone take to wake up?
Well, there's the whole the book I wrote is all full of various exercises. I mean, there's so many different aspects of life, and like you say, we're far more than what our careers titles say we are. But you examine the relationships. Are they satisfying, and why not? Am I the one that's primarily responsible for them being unsatisfying, or am I just living with the wrong people or dealing with the wrong people that are not right for me? And there's just really being able to identify whether your basic attitude toward life is negative or positive. I think that's probably where you start. When you wake up in the morning, more days than not, do you look forward to the day ahead, or do you see all kinds of problems that you're going to be facing in the day ahead? And once you change that basic orientation through various exercises, and then you have to bring the others along. If you're living with a spouse who's negative all the time, we need somehow to bring that person along with you, so that you're not constantly exposed to negative input. There's all these various circumstances that you're unsatisfied with, but you start by identifying those, and then you work on changing them. And basically, it's a, as you say, much more than just a job search. It's a total life transformation to get off that tack that you're wailing at and move forward to something better.
And one of the great questions I work with my coaching clients is, what keeps you from making this change? What could go wrong that might cause the whole kit and caboodle to blow up on you and for this all to fail? Now, most people will then turn around, start off by saying, well, not a heck of a lot, probably nothing really. And then I challenge them by saying, well, if it was so easy, you would have done it by now.
Or maybe you wouldn't have. That's the amazing thing, that so many people grumble for years, and yet they don't make any real effort to change, which is hard to believe. Fear, I guess, is the primary reason. Maybe I'm going to be without any income coming in. Maybe I'm going to be starving, or the extreme fears of not being able to live up to your responsibilities, and so they just keep going at it. Like the dumbest thing, I guess, was Einstein said the most foolish thing you can do is keep trying the same thing over and over again when you have a negative result, because you'll keep getting the same negative result.
Exactly right. And what most people start to realize is the way they have their life set up, they're damned if they make the change and damned if they stay.
Yeah, that's the that negative little self-image inside that says you're all that you can be, and that little voice that maybe was implanted in our mindset unintentionally by our parents or a school teacher or whatever when we were young kids, that say there's only the boundary on you is only so far. And if you start recognizing that and where it came from, that's probably a start to changing the whole course of your future. But you've got to understand it.
And what's fun is when I work with them to see, when I ask, is it possible between these two extremes you found that it might turn out differently? That maybe the way you have it set up might not be the only way it could occur.
Yeah,
and normally you see the light go on in their face as they consider the difference, and we start working from that perspective. So, with life change and career change, I love to flush up the paradox that they've created for themselves where they can't win.
Yeah.
And then start working with them to relax the reins of the horse a little bit that's brought them to the dance, and help them do things differently.
What worked for me, basically my aha moment was around the turn of the century, around 2000. I just happened to uncover some old mementos and some correspondence from girlfriends and other things back in my college days, and I realized what great potential I had back then as an athlete and as a, was in plays and did all kinds of things. And it just came to my mind, you may be a lot older now. You're no longer in your 20s, you're in your 50s, but all that potential is still there. It didn't go anywhere. It's just time to get back and use it. And, that kind of a moment might work, or whatever it takes to get implanted in your mind that the future is not all behind you, and there's all kinds of potential. You're still the same wonderful person you were in the past, and actually you're more because you've learned from all this adult experience that you've had, whatever your profession or whatever your experiences is. You've learned a lot over the past 20 to 30 years, and now's the time to combine that with the enthusiasm of youth, and let's get our life in where we want it to be headed, and go there, because there's nothing that says we can't.
No, there isn't. A great Stephen King line from Shawshank Redemption: "Get busy living or get busy dying."
Yeah, that's a good point. And too many of us are getting busy dying. You go to the high school reunion or a college reunion, and some people look young and vibrant, and other people look like they're about 80 years old or about 30 years older than they really are. So it all depends on the attitude and what they want out of life, and if they're taking care of their health and all those. I mean, there's so many issues, obviously, but it all starts with that inner feeling that there is more ahead and more positive ahead, and it's my job to go out and find it.
Amen. Hey, Roy, we're starting to come up to the end of our time with one another. Are there any last points that you want to make on this show to help my audience, help my listeners move forward with their lives or their careers?
Well, I would say my first would be to approach your vocation and life in general as a win-win proposition at all times. And my second suggestion would be to remember at all times that no one's worth is defined solely by vocation. And I think that's so sad when someone gets ready to retire and then feels like they're nothing just because or maybe they're frustrated in their job or lose it. And you're not just your job. And my third and final suggestion is not to cherish your vocation too much. There's certainly much more to life, and you certainly don't want to cherish your vocation at the expense of your health, relaxation, and relationships, because that's no kind of a life to be in.
So true. Roy, thank you for making time today. How can people find out about your books, your services, your show, the whole kit and caboodle of things that you do?
Well, you can find my show, and it's linked on Google right at the top. Middle age, your best age is all you have to type in there. And my website is middleagerenewal.com, and you can preview my books there. You can also go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. They're on there. But we go to my website, and we have a free little gift, a mini course that you can get for absolutely nothing. I won't say it's worth absolutely nothing, but that's what it costs.
Oh. Oh, no self-deprecating humor. Let other people make those remarks. You don't have to add them for yourself.
I'd love to have you join the congregation of renewed midlife, and then we all go out. Once we renew individually, we all go out and reinvigorate the organizations where we work and play and socialize, so that none of us have to go through the dull, boring life that so many people suffer through at middle age.
Amen. I'd be happy to be part of that mission. So, Roy, thank you. And, folks, I'll be back next time with someone else, and we'll be bantering and teaching as part of the next show. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and if you like this show, give it 5 stars in iTunes. Give it a good review. It'll help other people discover the show. Also want to encourage you to visit my website, which is thebiggamehunter.us. There's a lot of information there that you can watch, listen to, or read to help you find work more quickly. And this is brand new. I've introduced what I call the Trusted Advisor Service, so that if you're making a decision between different choices, if you're making a decision between an offer you're not particularly thrilled with and not quite sure what to do, schedule some time with me. Again, you can find that at my website, thebiggamehunter.us.